We're going to sit for 30 minutes or so and then have a short talk and some time for questions. So, if everyone is ready, please settle yourself into your meditation posture. Do make sure your phones are turned off. So feel free to use the meditation system you are accustomed to. You may note in the meditation when something comes into attention, maybe a thought from the past, a hope or a desire for the future, maybe a sound of something going on around you, maybe a physical feeling. Note how that comes into conscious awareness. How conscious awareness holds on to one thing at a time. Whatever that thing is that you are perceiving, that state of mind, that citta, has recognized something, a sound, a feeling, a thought, a word. Has perceptions around it, desire of attraction or repulsion from it. Has a conscious light attached to it. Try to notice or analyze that moment of perceiving something. And how that thing stays in your conscious awareness until it's replaced by something new, something stronger. And so the mind flits from perceiving one thing to perceiving another thing to perceiving another thing. Endlessly flitting like a monkey swinging through the forest, grabbing hold of one branch, letting go, holding on to another. You may reflect on what is not in conscious attention. If you are thinking about something from the past, you are not feeling the feeling in your body. If you're feeling the feeling of the breath, you are not tasting the taste in your mouth. Most of your life, most of your being is outside your conscious attention. Attention moves like a spotlight. Now I think about this. Now I desire that. Now I plan something. Now I feel uncomfortable. Now I feel a pleasant breath. If you are well established in meditation, you may be able to just restrain yourself from perceiving things. Just the mind being aware of the mind. You hold attention in restraint. You may feel sleepy or dull as this happens. You may feel agitation or a mild panic. Or your mind may get caught in desiring or aversion or doubt. The desiring mind is to be overcome. The agitated mind is to be soothed. The angry mind, hateful mind, is to be understood and brought to a halt. The sleepy mind is to perceive light. And the doubtful mind is cleared by seeing clearly what actually arises and ceases in the present moment. These are called hindrances, 5 hindrances. These can be overcome in meditation. What is it like to have a mind not caught in desiring, not caught in aversion, not caught in being scattered and diffused attention, not caught in sleepiness, darkness, and not in any doubt? What is that like? So we will sit together for 15-20 minutes or so. Make your mind as bright and as peaceful, as beautiful as you can. Call into conscious perception the idea of metta, loving kindness. Well-wishing for all world beings. You may call to mind those people, or animals, living or dead, for whom you feel love and appreciation, to help arouse this feeling. Any way that you can arouse the feeling of loving kindness is okay. Trigger it in any way that you find convenient. Latching onto that feeling, you welcome it, you hold on to it, nurture it. This is a beautiful refuge for the mind, can console the mind. Once you have the metta, the loving kindness, ticking over, you can offer it using visualization or using words or thoughts. You offer the loving kindness out to all world beings, near, far away, seen and unseen, the known and the unknown, all beings in every state. May they be peaceful, may they be happy, may they be free from suffering. Sabhe buddha balapatta pache kanancha yang balang arahanta nancha te jena rakang bandami sabhaso sabha buddha nupavena sattha soti bhagwantu te Sabhe buddha balapatta pache kanancha yang balang arahanta nancha te jena rakang bandami sabhaso Sabha Dhamma nupavena sattha soti bhagwantu te Sabhe buddha balapatta pache kanancha yang balang arahanta nancha te jena rakang bandami sabhaso Sabha sangha nupavena sattha soti bhagwantu te. So relax your posture. So, if I may start in the way that the Buddha started many of his talks, a little death reflection, that we are all destined to pass away. If we are lucky enough to get old, then our eyesight will fail, our teeth will come loose, the skin will dry up, and in the words of the sutta, your back will become crooked as a roof rafter. If you imagine the way that people built buildings, they would be familiar with roof rafters. And when you build out of wood, after a while the rafters start to sag and bow, and eventually the roof caves in. So this is our destiny, whether you like it or not. And when we reflect on it, this is in Buddhism called Maranat Sati. Maranat is the same root as our word mortify or mortician. It means death. And Sati is mindfulness. So Maranat Sati means mindfulness of death, or reflection on your own mortality. And this played a big part in Buddhism. Many of the temples that you can visit in Thailand will have skeletons hanging up. Many Westerners feel a little shocked or surprised when they see skeletons hanging up. But this is to be done as a reflection that this is our own destiny. If you do funeral chanting in the temples in Thailand, usually you offer cloth. Cloth was often offered at the burial grounds, funeral grounds, presumably because the dead people don't need their cloth anymore. And cloth was hard to make and hard to come by, so if monks found bits of cloth that didn't appear to have an owner, they could actually just take it. Now normally things have to be offered to monks, but bits of cloth lying around we can actually take if we feel that they don't have an owner, and then clean it up and sew it up into a robe. And so the funeral grounds or burial grounds were often a place where bits of cloth could be found. So lay people, when they were offering robes to monks, quite often they would go and throw the cloth onto the bushes around the burial grounds for the monks to find. And this is why in Thailand, if you ever do ceremonies where you make offerings in the temple, you have a tot papa. Tot means to toss. Papa is the cloth. Even you ask Thais, why do you tot papa? Normally you offer something, you don't toss it. But no, if you offer robes to monks, you have to toss it. And always the tot papa, you toss the robes, and you can put in front of the monk without the monk receiving it. Normally you have to put things into our hands to be considered received. So funeral or death reflections were very common in early Buddhist suttas. It has a quality of reorganizing your priorities. If you remember that you're going to pass away, you will be less likely to be engaged in grudges or petty fights or squabbles or politics, family conflicts. It reorganizes your attention. As some of you may well have had moments in your life when you were faced with your own mortality, often you find it's quite peaceful. Have you found this? Something quite peaceful about it. A friend of mine in Chiang Mai had some kind of stroke. It was a bleeding on the brain, and he thought his number was up, and he was quite peaceful. So he reports to me. He was quite ready to pass on, even though he does have a wife and a son that he would like to stay for. Some of you may have come to this too, that when we're really faced with our own mortality, there is something quite peaceful about it. It's not as bad as you would think it to be. A few times I've had it. One time a Thai doctor told me I had lymphatic cancer, which I don't have, but he was pretty clear. I had these swellings under my neck here. He said it's either lymphatic cancer or bad teeth. So then I thought that was it. I was going to go. I was 35 at the time, so nearly 20 years ago. At the time, I was crawling alongside of a cliff, kind of, what do you call it, rock climbing. And I was on this ridiculously tiny little ledge, and there was a tiny little weed growing out of the cliff face, and I was holding onto this little weed, crawling along the face, and I looked down, and it's 200 feet drop onto jagged rocks. And I suddenly thought, why am I doing this? And I lost my nerve completely, or lost my desire to be anywhere, and I've never done rock climbing again since. But my thought was, it's about 3 seconds to hit the ground, and then my troubles are over. I can hold my breath for 3 seconds, and it's quite peaceful. Anyway, so a couple of days ago I went to see our old Sangha member Arthur, and he is getting pretty old, and he had a couple of strokes. He can't really remember what's being said to him, for a few minutes in the past. And a number of things we asked him, ordinary, simple things, like, have you seen so-and-so? And he'd be like, I don't really know. He was quite happy, but it's the end of his life, so it was hard to see. You don't know when it's going to hit you. My one friend was in a temple opposite mine. It's called Wat Nap Prok in Thonburi, a Western monk. Just landed from New Zealand, was taxiing across to the temple, trying to get his phone sorted out, get his SIM card working. And the taxi hit a brick wall. He didn't know about it. He just woke up in hospital a week later. He wasn't too bad, but the impact of his face on the seat in front of him his teeth cut all the flesh out of his mouth, quite seriously. The hospital cut a piece of flesh from his bum and rebuilt his mouth, which makes for some really good jokes. He had a good sense of humor. I was saying, you're talking out of your bum, and he was saying, don't make me laugh, because he couldn't move his mouth. Unfortunately, the backside turned bad, and he had to have several operations on it, not helped by flying back to New Zealand. Anyway, his health just everything started to pack up, and he died within a year after that. It was kind of funny because as a child, he'd had brain cancer, and they'd taken this tumor out of his head. But in those days, they didn't have titanium plates. Titanium can graft onto bone. It's the only metal that can graft onto bone. So they just left this hole in his head. It's quite weird. Again, he had a good sense of humor about it. I say, I can see what you're thinking. But it's quite ironic that he survived brain cancer but couldn't survive a Thai taxi. So, you don't know, he's only a few years older than me, you don't know when the end is going to come. So this reflection was a big part of original Buddhism. Continual reflection on our own mortality and our own place in the universe. Now, according to Buddhism, there is a cosmology, was laid out by the original Sakyamuni Buddha. It's not so popular among modern-day vipassana or meditation circuits, because we like to talk about meditation, overcoming greed, overcoming anger, having metta, being a nice person, calming the mind, sitting in meditation in blissful states, but not so much about dying and being reborn. So according to Buddhism, the Buddhist cosmology, which played a central part in the early teachings, we are not physical beings. The mind or the citta does survive death, and upon dying one is reborn into other states. If you have lived your life in a bad way, especially with alcohol or killing or generally breaking precepts, will tend to draw you down into suffering realms. If you have lived your life in a responsible, clean manner, it will tend to draw you up into more heavenly realms, according to Buddhism. The analogy was like a pot of ghee or oil. If you throw it into a pond and that pot sinks to the bottom and breaks, if the pot is filled with rocks and stones, the stones will sink and stay on the bottom of the lake. If the pot is filled with ghee or honey, when it breaks at the bottom of the pond, the ghee or honey will float to the top naturally. So this was the Buddha's own analogy. He said that when you pass away, your consciousness will float to its natural level. So if you have a purified consciousness, then you will float to a better destination. However, even if you are born in heavenly realms, by the way, the lower heavenly realms you can get to just by doing good deeds, by being a nice person. But the more refined realms above that, you can only get to through meditation. So it's called a heavy karma, or a strong karma. If you have practiced meditation to the level of jhana, or absorption meditation, apparently you are destined automatically for a high rebirth, unless you have made equally powerful negative karma. The powerful negative karma comes from killing a Buddha, drawing the blood of a Buddha, killing an arahant, causing divisions within the Sangha, killing your parents. There's a few things like that called heavy karma. If you have done those, then you're automatically going to be drawn downwards. If you have practiced well, then you will be drawn upwards. There is some question whether you should aim for a rebirth in the human realm or heavenly realms. But again, according to Buddhism, no, it's fine to set your sights higher. The problem is that from heavenly realms, you still are born into them, and you will still die from that place at the end of your karma. So simply making good karma, simply being a good person, is not enough to get you out of the cycle of samsara. This is Buddhist cosmology. Take it or leave it. Don't take it too seriously. If you don't like it, you can pass by. But it is part of original Buddhism. That can be proven and is a fact. So our good deeds or meditation can draw you into refined states after you pass away, but also in this lifetime too. Unwholesome karma will cause shaking or instability or unconfidence in the mind, especially in the face of death. And I experienced this some years ago. I was staying in, I'm often wondering which stories I should say, and like thinking, sometimes I have to censor myself, right? So one time I was staying in the monastery in England, and they have a ghost there, her name, Madame Baddington, if I remember correctly. And she is apparently a deva, so she's attained to a higher rebirth, but still lives on that hilltop where she lived as a human. And I think it was during the reign of Queen Mary, who tried to switch the country from, if I get this right, Henry VIII had turned the country Protestant, and she tried to turn it back to Catholic, and caused a lot of bloodshed, which is where we get Bloody Marys from. And so this woman had, I guess she'd been a Protestant or a Catholic during this time, and she'd been locked up in the tower in the farmhouse, and she scratched a verse from the Bible on the glass in the tower, and you can still go up and read it. She passed away, she died, and her bones were scattered in the field. And then I guess the politics shifted back again, and the next owner of the farmhouse collected her bones together and put them in a tomb underneath on the side of the hill under the farmhouse. And you can still go into this tomb now, and her bones are there collected in a little box. A couple of Bible verses written along for reflection. It's really creepy. A number of times people came, some Thais came from Norway. At that time, Norway had the largest shopping centre in Europe, so a lot of Thais went there. I don't see what's so good about a large shopping centre, because it's just the same shops, right? They're just bigger anyway. They would fly over from Norway, and they came over, and they didn't speak much English, but the Thai woman said, "Who's that little woman walking around with the big thing around her neck?" And she was describing Madame Baddington with the, what's it called, ruffles? There's a word for it, thing around the neck, right? Nobody know? Ruffles. We need Marissa, she'll have all the technical terms. And then all of us, our hair was standing up on end. Oh God, you're describing this woman. So, like an idiot, I went to meditate in front of the tomb on the full moon night. And I am scared of ghosts. I'm not proud to admit that. But since I was very young, I've been terrified of the dark and terrified of ghosts. And even now, I get it, and I wake up terrified, and then I have to assert my logical brain. And I sat there. I didn't have the guts to go right down in front of the tomb, so I was on the grassy knoll above the tomb, sitting there meditating. Lovely night, full moon. I was sitting there, definitely wasn't sleepy. I was terrified. But the thought occurred to me, I haven't been that bad a person. It's kind of like a deal I was making with God. It's like, I haven't been that bad. If you're going to kill me now or attack me now, I've not been that bad. So I've reflected on this quite a lot, because when you do face your end, how confident are you that you've actually lived your life in a good and proper way? And this confidence is something that will come up not from your thinking. You can't argue for it. When you're facing your demise, you can't argue and say, well, actually, I always think of Adolf Hitler going to pearly gates and saying, you know, actually I was trying to make Germany great again. You don't get that chance to make your arguments, because you can argue for anything. The karma is actually bright or dark as you have done it, and you don't get a chance to make arguments or excuses. So what is your state of mind when your pot breaks at the bottom of the pond? Are you going to sink or float? There's another time in the temple we had every cold season you were told to put our mosquito nets out under the trees, and we'd have a 10-day meditation retreat. So all the monks go out and they find a nice tree, and you put your mosquito net out and your ground sheet. And I'd actually made a pretty good one, and I'd sewn the ground sheet into the net so snakes wouldn't get in, which is handy when you're meditating, not to have snakes crawl in. There's actually a snake next to where I first did this, and I see him in the mornings, but my ground sheet came up and I felt safe. So the second or third year, I put my place way out into the swamp out the back of the temple, and I dragged this large table up with a, 8x4 wooden table, and I dragged this all the way out there. It took a couple of days to heave it out, and I'd set it up on the swamp where the canals go. It's reclaimed farmland. And I got out there and meditating away, nice cool weather, and then I remembered that I'm afraid of ghosts. I've been so set on setting up my campsite that I'd forgotten to think about, actually I might not enjoy it out there. Anyway, I can assert my logical brain. And then I would hear this horrible kind of rustling. My hair is standing on end, my eyes are wide open, and no, it's just the wind, just the wind. Sama arahang. But it kept coming. It sounded like a Frankenstein, like dragging his feet through the grass. I'm like, there are no Frankenstein monsters out here. Sit and meditate. You're making it up. You're thinking it's just noises. And then suddenly, boom, something hit the leg of the table that I was on. I was absolutely petrified, but I leaned over and looked down. There was this huge turtle. I like turtles. So, anyway, how did I get onto that? Reflection on death and dying should awaken some urgency in the practice, and this was something that the Buddha had recommended. So I'm going to recite to you in Pali and in English one of the verses that the Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha, the original Sakyamuni or Siddhartha Gautama, one of the original verses that he gave in India. But just to set it up, one of the key teachings that he gave was called the 5 khandhas, or in Sanskrit, 5 skandhas. and they're a little difficult, or they've been over-analyzed by Abhidhamma schools or analytical schools. But the original meaning of 5 khandhas was actually quite basic and simple. What it means is anything that comes into your conscious awareness, that moment of consciousness, or that citta, has certain elements to it. So I'm going to use our brand new binary gong. This is new this week. As an example, to look at that and call that into your attention. That moment of perceiving it, you're going to need certain factors in play in order to have a moment of conscious perception. Firstly, it needs a physical form. You cannot have something that is purely abstract, according to Buddhism. According to some schools of philosophy or psychology, you can disagree, but so even something like democracy, which is an abstract concept, you can't have a moment of perception of that without the word democracy, or without a symbol like the Statue of Liberty, or the Magna Carta, or Democracy Monument. Hey, why not? You need some physical way to tie your mind onto that perception. You also have an intention towards it. So the physical form is rupa, it's called rupa, first khandha. You also have a physical intention towards it. And in philosophy, when we say intend, it means a directionality. It doesn't mean your intentions of what you are going to do. So you cannot see, you have to see something. You cannot love, you have to love something. The mind always is intended towards an object or pointed to an object. So sankhara means you are intended towards that object. You have liking and disliking, called feeling, or pleasant sensation, unpleasant sensation. Should be liking and disliking, but however you want to translate it. This rarely gets talked about, but in every moment of conscious attention, there is always this feeling tone of whether you like something or you don't like something. Do you ever see or experience something and not know whether you like it or dislike it? If you do, that's neutral feeling, so you can't escape it. You can't escape liking and disliking, because even if you have neither, you have neutral feeling tone. So every moment of perception has this quality of liking and disliking. It's actually, in psychology, is a shortcut to behavior, according to evolutionary psychologists, who I don't rate very highly personally, but anyway. They say that evolution has taught us not to work things out, but to react on feeling. So if you hear rustling in the trees, you don't want to sit and try and work out what it is that's rustling in the trees, because it's probably something bigger than you are, and running is probably a good bet. And if you're wrong, there's no downside. You ran from a turtle. But if you're right, you ran from a lion. And as long as you run faster than your friend, you're safe. You don't have to run faster than the lion. You have to run faster than your friend, right? So feeling, liking and disliking is a shortcut to behavior. If you have food, take something out of the fridge and you're not sure if it's good or bad, you smell it, right? And if it smells bad, you automatically have this disgust. You don't have to think about it and that smell. Where have I smelled that smell before? Maybe that smell could be caused by bacteria. No, feeling of liking and disliking is a shortcut to your behavior. This is why we like sugar and salt. because they're hard to find in the environment. So we're evolutionarily trained to be attracted to sugar and salt. Whenever it becomes available, down it as much as we can. Now it's available in every 7-Eleven and every tube of Pringles. So we're overstimulated. Hyperstimulation is called in psychology. So liking and disliking is this drive that often you are not aware of, that attracts you to people or repulses you from people with a prejudice that isn't thought of, isn't calculated. A lot of research into that these days. Into foods or modes of transport. My friend whose face went through the seat in the taxi, I learned from that, and now I always wear my seatbelt in a taxi. If I get in a taxi and I don't have a seatbelt, I feel anxious because of this. Feeling controls a lot of our behavior, and it's not always to be trusted. Often you dislike things that are good for you, like salad, and you like things that are bad for you, like pizza. You can use your intelligence. Me, I love salad now. I had salad today with millet. So, a moment of perception, you have the form, you have the thing. In this case, it's a piece of metal, but it may be a word in your mind, or a symbol, or an image. Must have a form to gather around. You have intention towards the object. You have the liking and disliking around that object. You have perception, sanya, which means you know what it is, what it's for. You have that's a word one teacher used, historicity, means like you know what it is and what it's for without having to work it out. A perception, or sanya actually means memory. It's translated usually as perception, but the root of the word means memory. And you have consciousness. And consciousness means it is in conscious attention. While you are looking at this bowl, you are not looking at this clock. If you're looking at this clock, you are not feeling the feelings in your foot. Conscious awareness is only aware of one thing at a time. Your subconscious may be aware of lots of things, but that's not part of Buddhism. You're going into psychology or philosophy if you want to analyze that. So every moment of perceiving something has these five, has this form, has feelings of liking and disliking, has the consciousness of it, has the memory of it, and is in conscious, has that light of consciousness. To a meditator, you see one thing after another thing arise in the mind, or arise in perception. Every time your mind perceives something, it has these five aspects to that perception. Holding the mind back from perceiving anything at all is our job as a meditator. Please note, if you are not perceiving anything at all and you're holding your mind back, you may philosophically think, well, you get the bzzz, the dial tone from God, the end of the consciousness. This is not the case. What happens? Your consciousness or your experience becomes brighter, sharper, more powerful. You get a energization that runs through the body. You enter into jhana or concentration states. Very, very beautiful, very bright, very powerful. When the mind withdraws from perceiving things, this mechanism of perceiving objects, what happens is you start to enter the path to enlightenment. This can be experienced directly for yourself. Don't count yourself out. Don't assume that this isn't in your experience. But you have to meditate to foster and understand and grow and know where to find this experience. So, in this particular sutta, early teaching of the Buddha comes to his monks, and presumably someone had asked him the question. By the way, I should explain, the monks would stay out in the forest, but every 14 days, according to the lunar schedule in Thai, it's called a one prat. You'll see it marked on Thai calendars. The monks would gather and they would recite teachings to each other. So you would learn certain suttas or poems or synopses of the teachings that you have heard, and then recite them to each other. So even in the Buddha's time, this predates Buddhism. Even in the Buddha's time, the monks would meet on these special days and discuss Dhamma together. So we're going to original, actual Buddhism, because there's a lot of pseudo-Buddhism that gets taught these days. In the sutta, the Buddha says he was staying in this particular grove, and he addressed the monks. He said, "I will teach you the recitation called a night well spent, or an auspicious night." By the way, those of you who like to dig into the weeds and follow the original things, this is Majjhima Nikaya 131. It's called the Bade Karatta Sutta. And if ever you do any funerals in a Thai temple, usually this verse gets recited in the funeral chanting. So I will teach you the verse for a night well spent. And he gives the verse with 4 stanzas. It's very straightforward. Do not run back to the past. Do not hope for the future. What is past is left behind. The future has not arrived. I'm trying to think of that stupid joke. Don't hope for the past because it's passed away. Don't hope for the future because you don't know what will happen. And don't hope for the present because I didn't get you one. I told you it's stupid. Don't run back to the past. Do not hope for the future. What's past is left behind. The future has not arrived. And in the present moment phenomenon, see clearly in every case. You know it, you foster it. Unfaltering, unshakable mind. Today is the day to do your work keenly, because tomorrow, who knows when death will come. There is no bargaining to be made with the Lord of Death and his hordes. The peaceful sage explained, it's those who keenly meditate like this, tirelessly all day, all night, that have an auspicious night. He says, how do you run back to the past? So how you run back to the past? These 5 khandhas coming up in moments of perception. In the past, I had feelings like this. I had form like this. I had memory like this. I had consciousness like this. Running back to the past. Usually, if you look at the past, you're focusing on things you dislike in the past. But you may be having a good memory. How do you not run back to the past? You do not muster delight there, thinking I was like this in the past, I had this feeling in the past, I had these perceptions in the past, I had this consciousness in the past. You do not muster or arouse delight in that. How do you hope for the future? You have delight thinking, may I be like this in the future? May my form be like this? May my memories be like this? May my consciousness be like this in the future? He said, and how do you not hope for the future? You do not muster delight for the future, thinking, may I be like this? May I have feelings like this? May I have thoughts like this? May I have consciousness like this? That you do not muster delight there. By the way, the word delight, delighting it means to hold in the hand. So even if it's something that you dislike, you delight in it to the extent that you're obsessed with it or you are drawn towards it. So delighting in can mean both positive and negative things. How are you shaken? How do you falter in presently arising phenomenon? Well, that such a person has not heard the right teaching, has not heard the true teaching. So they regard their thoughts, their feelings, their perceptions as being themselves. How do you not falter? How are you not shaken in presently arising phenomenon? Here one has heard the true teaching and have seen people who practice the true teaching. They do not regard anything that arises in perception as me or myself. And then he repeats the stanza. Shall I do it in Pali? I chant this, I know it by heart, but I can't do it on my own in front of you, then I'll start forgetting. So I'm going to read it as I do it. Atitanang yaya gammaya na patikanke anagatang yadatatang pahinang tang apatan cha anagatang Pachupanam chayo dhammang ta 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 vipassati asanghirang asankupang tang vidda manubruhaye chevakit chamata panko janya maranang sawe nahino sangharang te namaha sene namachuna Ewang vihari ma taping ahora tamatang ditang tam weba de karato ti santo achi kate muniti. And he finishes, he says, this is what I meant when I said I shall teach you the passage for recitation for a night well spent. If you're Thai, you may recognize some of those words. Atitanang yana gatmaya. Atitanang means in the past. In Thai is adit, the past. You may recognize Maranang Suwe. Maranang is death. You may recognize Mahasenena Matjuna. The Mahasenena is the hordes, or the sangha, or the group of Matjuna, the god of death. Santo is not Santa Claus, is peace. Achikate muniti, muniti is a muni. So actually some of these words you will have actually, many of you will be familiar with. So, that is the verse on remaining in the present moment. Just finish off by mentioning every Dhamma teaching has its fake side or false side. And I got caught up in this for many years, that staying in the present moment does not mean I'm not going to worry about past or the future, I'm just going to enjoy my cappuccino, I'm going to have a nice sandwich, I'm going to play with the cat because I'm enjoying the present moment. Mindfully, of course. make it holy. So clearly in the sutta he's saying the mind does not attach to any perceptions that come up and invade the consciousness. We practice like this day and night. Anybody have any question or comment? So yes. So if you are part of the poem or stanza said, you know the present moment precisely as it is. So if you know as the mind latches onto a perception, you know it as just a moment of perceiving consciousness. You do not get caught up, in the words of the stanza, as seeing this as me or myself. So what that happens is, if a thought comes up to you, something that happened in your childhood, you latch onto it, say, yeah, that wasn't a very good thing, or that was a really happy day, the day I went kayaking on that lake. I should do that again. You're caught in it. You've made that thought yourself, and you've become lost in it. Knowing it exactly as it actually is means you're sitting here knowing yourself very clearly, knowing your meditation very clearly. You've seen this thing arise in a moment of perception. There is no hanging onto it, no holding onto it in that moment in any way, including a cappuccino. It's not like I'm going to enjoy my cappuccino, I'm in the present moment, which is what some people interpret. It's knowing, keeping that awareness firmly on yourself, on this consciousness, and seeing that thing has come into your consciousness and is about to disappear. Then you are holding yourself back from it. Now in the sutta he gives this as a night well spent, but in other suttas he will say then, at that point of seeing things actually as they are arising and ceasing, you overcome 5 hindrances. That is desire, hatefulness, scatteredness of mind, sleepiness, and doubting. If you overcome these 5, you enter into jhanas, or concentration. As the mind becomes concentrated, you let go of any meditation object you have, and you move through these experiences. These will take you into completely other states of mind, or consciousness that is separate from normal consciousness of objects, or if you like, purified consciousness. This then opens up the path. In this sutta, he's not giving the entire teaching. He's simply saying to his monks who already know how to practice, giving them that reminder, hold that mind still in attention. Yeah. At the back. By the way, if you are also in Thai, you can find this sutta, Majjhima Nikaya Nangroi 31. You can look it up online. You can find it in Thai translation. Right. So the question is about nama rupa. So when I mention the 5 khandhas, any moment of perceiving has, if you break it down, has these qualities to it. So if, for example, you think about Toyota cars, you need the word Toyota, maybe you can think of the symbol Toyota, maybe you can imagine a picture of a Toyota. In that moment of Toyota consciousness, you have that physical form, the rupa, the word or the symbol or the imagination. You also have the liking or the disliking of it. You have the perception or the sanya of it. you also have the consciousness. That is, this Toyota is in consciousness, not anything else. So this is how we break down a moment of consciousness. If you break down consciousness as a process, so those 5 khandhas are like a snapshot. If I were to take your conscious mind as you sit here for 1 hour and I was to take a photograph, that snapshot of your experience will have these 5 khandhas in it. If, however, I want to analyze your experience as a process, like how do I drive my Toyota from here to Hue Hin? I have to say I get on the expressway, I get on Petkasem Road and I drive for 200 miles and I turn left and I hit the beach. So there is a step-by-step process. So an alternative way of analyzing the mind is by process. And in this process we start with ignorance. You don't know avicca, literally you don't know the vicca, the method. So avicca is translated as ignorance, but means you don't know the method. Because of avicca, you have sankhara, which means your mind is directed into action. Because of sankhara, you have consciousness starting to arise. Consciousness always has an object. That object is analyzed as nama rupa. It has a physical aspect to it and it has a mental aspect to it. Because of that nama rupa, you have salayatana, which means sense door consciousness. Because of that, you have contacting or phassa. Because of phassa, you have liking and disliking. Because of liking and disliking, you have craving. Because of craving, you have attachment. Because of attachment, you have becoming, bhava, popsam. Because of becoming, you have birth. Because of birth, you have aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, grief, and despair. So that is paticca samuppada. So usually, nama rupa comes up as part of the process of consciousness. It's just a way to analyze it. Sometimes you can analyze motor cars as having wheels, body, steering wheel, passenger element and an engine. Or you can, and there may be 40 different kinds of wheels and 20 different kinds of glass and 6 different kinds of engines. It's just a way of analyzing it. Or you can analyze a motor car as in what it can do. Is it a jeep or does it go on water or sand? Different ways to analyze things. So the Buddha used a number of different analytical methods. The 5 khandhas was one, 6 senses was the most common one. The analysis according to process used nama rupa. So, yeah. Did that confuse people more? Some of you, he knows many of these terms, so I can say these terms with him. If you are not well familiar with Buddhist terms, then these things can be a bit confusing. But, yeah.
So you said only one thing can be in consciousness at any given time.
Yes.
I don't know. For me, I kind of sometimes, this is a trick I picked up from a psychologist. She said if you really want to focus on something, bring your attention to your feet and listen to the other person. Sometimes when my mind gets distracted, I do that. I have awareness of my feet as well as I'm hearing you, for instance. Sometimes even in meditation, if my mind goes on breath, I would do that. So how do you explain that?
Right. It's one of my favorite topics, but I have to venture over into Gestalt psychology to really explain it. The Buddha didn't explain it in great detail, and this is what the Gestalt psychologists looked at. A Gestalt is an accumulated picture. It's like a thing that arises. However, right now I can look at all of you and see the audience. I have now gestalted you all into one thing, the audience. So you may sit there and think, well, I can see like 28 different people here. That's true, and I can look at you individually, or I can look at your noses, or your feet. Gestalt means that you carve out of your perception one kind of main thing that then becomes the foreground and everything else the background. In proper psychological terms, it's called a figure on ground. And there's a lot of analysis about this. You can look up online Gestalt psychology, not counseling. Gestalt counseling was different. This is psychology. This is my area of psychology. As a basic experiment, you can try it. Try being aware of your foot and the sound of the air conditioning at the same time. And initially, you can gestalt them together, my foot and the aircon. My foot and the aircon. And it's my foot, the aircon. It's my foot, the aircon. And then you find yourself flitting between the two, and it starts to break down. So you can try this experiment for yourself. Try and hold multiple things in the mind at the same time. You can only do it by putting those multiple things together into one thing. So if there's a chair, does it have 4 legs, a base and a back? Or is it one thing, a chair? You can gestalt it. You can accumulate it into pap ruam in Thai. You can assemble it into a chair and think, okay, chair, now that's it. So that chair is now one thing, not 4 legs and a back, seat and a back. So this is going into psychology. I'd love to talk to you for hours on this, but I do need whiteboards and projector. And we play lots of tricks and optical illusions about this. One of the original experiments on this was Wertheimer. It's in the early days of TV. And they were just starting to realize that a series of pictures will be perceived in the mind as one thing moving. So a series of pictures of a person. You may have done this with a flick book, right? You draw a little man and you make his legs move and you draw him over and over and over again and then you can flick through the book and it looks like a little man's running. So Wertheimer did these experiments. He had a series of lights. And if you blink one light, turn it off, the next light, turn it off, the next light, what you see is one light traveling the distance, even though your brain knows there's nothing moving. And interestingly, he experimented on how quickly you can blink the lights. So if you turn a light on and you wait 5 seconds and then turn the next one, your brain will gestalt it into blinking lights. If you blink them close enough together, your mind will gestalt it as one thing moving. Now you might say, logically, no, I'm seeing many light bulbs, which is true. But your brain is gestalting one thing, the one thing that moves. And interestingly, even if you separate the lights by quite a distance, you can have the perception of the light jumping between. You can see this on YouTube. There's quite a lot of videos on this. Even though you know there's no light that jumps between the light bulbs, but your brain will fill that in for you. So it is tricky. It seems as if you can be aware of many things at once, but actually the mind is just directing to one thing at a time. I have a friend of mine. She runs a dance center in Bangkok, and I know I've run many large events and I know how stressful it is, and you've got to get the chairs and the microphone and the lights and the aircon and a sign outside and are the bathrooms open and a lot of moving parts even to an event like this. She would have these dance performances on. She's got all these dancers and the music and the costumes and the makeup, and so I would sometimes help her with these things, and she has this ability, and I think it's a much more female quality than male, to just have her mind on 50 different things. And while we were doing all this, I cut my finger or my foot, And I told her, oh, don't worry, it's just a little cut. And she was running around organising all these things. And about 15 minutes later, she's running past me, organising other things. And she puts a couple of Band-Aids in my hand to put on. How did you even think about that? How did your mind hold all these things in attention at once? So it can feel like you're conscious of a lot of things at a time. But to a meditator, when you sit and you look directly at the mind, no, you see it's actually this moment of perceiving something, that drops, now you perceive a new thing. That drops, now you perceive a new thing. To the meditator looking, as the Buddha said here, as things actually are. So, yeah. We're just about out of time. I'm still going to be here. If anybody has any further questions or comments, you're welcome to come up, but we're going to finish the event for the evening. I'm here next week, and it's my final week, right? Next week. And then I'm off to Australia, and then Toronto, and I'm probably just going to stay. So the only thing I'm due back for is January next year. So I may not see you till January next year. So it'll be my final week next week. Okay? Yeah, which visa? I'm always stressed about visa. Every foreigner living in Thailand is stressed about visas. No, I have to get an Australian one and a Canadian one, but these aren't usually too difficult. My problem is, while I'm away, I lose my Thai visa. So, fortunately, at Abbott in Ohio, and Americans seem to laugh when I say Ohio. I don't know why that is. Has said to me he can organize a new visa for me to come back into Thailand. So I have a route back. One in Ohio, one in Michigan. So I should be okay to come back. Okay.
We'll see. I certainly hope this is not, next week is not going to be your final maybe for now, but probably somewhere.
For this year.
We'll see. But it's not for sure. Anyway, next week we'll have Pandit, and the announcement is already out. It mentions in the announcement that this may be your last chance to learn something from Pandit for the foreseeable future, so by all means be around here next week. Not to worry, after Pandit left, we will still continue with Will Bang. We'll have a little break for Songkran. The Songkran holiday is something that we are not going to be open on the 15th. And then after that, we'll actually have a Zen teacher, Gil Alon. You've seen him here before. And he'll do a double billing. He will be here twice. And then already for May, we have a whole program lined up. So by all means, do continue to be here and enjoy the teachings that we offer. Having said that, of course, a very big thank you to Pandit, just for tonight, but for all the many things that he has done for us. And if you want to show some appreciation, there's always the opportunity of the donation box outside, one for Pandit and one for Dhamma. Then it would be much appreciated if you help us clean up the chairs, the low chairs, fold them, and they go to the balcony. And the white chairs, they go differently. We don't bring them down, but best for you, we store them now here on this floor.
You can just stack it in the back of the room, and we can.
Okay. By the way, I noticed Banari put some drinks and things out here, so if you want to take a refreshment, I think that's for us, right?
Yes. Please stack the chairs in the room, at the back of the room, and after counting donation, we can put them back.
Okay, so the white chairs just in the back of the room. And that will, hope I'm not forgetting anything, that will go for tonight. And then
Sabitiyo vivachantu sabharogo vinasatu mate bhavatvan tarayo sukhiti kayuko bhava apiva Dhana sili sanichang vuddha pachayino Chattaro Dhamma vadanti ayuvano sukhang balang. Okay, good. See you next week. If anyone has any special requests for next week, you can make a special request. Okay.